Welcome to video 5 of chapter 10, and we will look at the topic of attachment. So attachment is an emotional bond that is central to the well-being of infants and children as they grow. It is that connection that develops between an infant and their primary caregiver. Typically, the mother is in most cases the first attachment figure, but it doesn't have to be. The infant does certain behaviors to keep the parent nearby in order to satisfy their needs. And these behaviors are, you know, um, you know, kind of automatic behaviors that they're born with. Things like crying, it pulls the parent closer when they cry, or when they smile, it engages the parent. Um, Once the baby becomes mobile, they will follow the parent around, either crawling or eventually walking after them. And all of these are little behaviors that help to fuel the attachment between parent and child. Uh, when they do feel like they have a secure attachment, infants and toddlers will explore more. They will show more independence. So it's almost like, two opposites, but being more attached, it makes you more independent. So don't mistake, attachment for dependence at all. It's really the opposite. I mean, securely attached children or infants or even teenagers are more likely to be independent. And they use the parent as a secure base. Um, it's it's the idea of you can think of it as a safety net. When they know the parents nearby, they're more willing to go and explore and take more risks, knowing that the parent's there to catch them in a sense if they fall. I mean, the parent is there for them when they need them. So with very young children, you will see them often in when they're playing in a room or at a playground. I mean, they will often look for their parent. They will return to their parent at times and then go back off again. And this is the idea of the secure base, and it continues throughout childhood, and then, like I already mentioned, into adolescence. I mean, as an adolescent, you'll take more risks in life, knowing that if you know that your parents are there for you when you really need them. And even, I would say, even into adulthood, knowing that if you had to, you could move back home, for instance. You've got that safety net. If things fall apart in your life, you can still turn to your parents and they'll help you out. And that's what a secure attachment brings you. It's that safety net. I like to think of it as a safety net, but we call it a secure base, where that that you can always return to, and they will be there for you and comfort you and help you. So a little bit of the history of attachment and how we've looked at it in psychology. So early theorists like Freud and the behaviorists, so looking back at the first half of the 1900s, they were the major psychology players at that time. Behaviorism was huge, and Freud's psychoanalytic theory was still very prominent, and they both put forth ideas that attachment develops because the mother feeds the infant. And so hunger is it's a drive reduction theory. Hunger is a drive. When your drive is satisfied or reduced, then it leads you to appreciate um, the the caregiver that has helped to reduce your drive. So a little bit more specifically, I mean, the behaviorists, they brought in the notion of classical conditioning. Um, when you um, when you're hungry and the mother provides you food, food acts as an unconditional stimulus. It produces satisfaction. It relieves your hunger. And because the mother is paired with the food, especially if she's breastfeeding, it's always coming from the mother, or even if she's bottle feeding. I mean, if it's the mother always holding the bottle, then you pair the two together. It's just like the Pavlov's dog, learning to respond to the bell um, that always signaled food. I mean, you learn to respond to your mother as if she is food, that which and the food automatically gives you satisfaction. So your mother now gives you satisfaction just being around her. So they thought it was classical conditioning. Freud said that a baby develops a cathexis, which basically just means a concentration of your mental energy on a person, idea, or object. Kind of like a fixation. Basically is what that word means. So the baby develops like a fixation or, on the mother because of the food that she provides. And so in both cases, they concluded that it was the feeding that led to the attachment. And so the this was the notion in psychology for the first half of the 1900s. We develop attachment because our mother feeds us. And then along came Harry Harlow. And this is a slide I've added, so you may not have it. Um, I just added it today, uh, and you don't have to write all this down if you don't have it. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about Harry Harlow's experiment because it was very important in the area of attachment. And what he did in his 1958 study was he he took infant monkeys, right after birth. He took them from their mothers, and separated them from any other monkeys, and they were raised, well, raised. I'm putting quote marks right now, by surrogate mothers, and you can see pictures of them here. There were two surrogate mothers. One of them, if you look at the picture on the left, you can see it is covered with what's called terry cloth, which is very soft and comforting. The other one was just made of wire mesh, um, and not obviously not that comfortable. But as you can see, the wire mesh surrogate mother is the one with the food for the monkey. So every time this baby monkey wants to eat, they have to go to that wire monkey in order to get food. Um, that's the only place it would be available to them. And so he was basically, pitting two things against each other. I mean, one surrogate mother provides comfort and softness, the other one provides food. And then he would do things like scare the little monkeys, to see where they ran to, because it's any you know any animal or human will go to their attachment figure when they're frightened. So as a little child, you would run to your mother if she's your major attachment figure. And so he would send in, like, he had like a little robot he would send in that makes all sorts of noise and has flashing lights, and it's scary to these little monkeys. And anyways, what he found was that they would run to the cloth monkey, the terry cloth monkey, and cling to it whenever they were frightened. And in fact, they spent the majority of their time with the cloth surrogate mother rather than the wire one, and usually only went to the wire monkey like when they had to eat. I've seen pictures of of a baby monkey like trying to cling to the soft cloth monkey like while they try to reach over to feed while they're still clinging to the monkey because you can see they were fairly close together and um so they didn't like this wire monkey and they only went to it for food. So this really dispelled the notion that we become attached to those that feed us. Because otherwise, these baby monkeys should have become attached to the wire monkey. But they became attached to the monkey that provided them comfort. And this was his basic conclusion is that it is comfort that leads to attachment. It is your mother holding you and being there when you're afraid, and the contact, the what he called contact comfort that your mother provides you that leads to attachment. And this is certainly accepted now and has been shown in other studies. So this was a breakthrough study that really went, that showed that Freud and the behaviorists were incorrect. It didn't have to do with feeding. It was about um, sensitive caregiving and comfort provided by a mother. An early researcher in attachment theory was Bowlby, and he provided the first real stage theory of attachment. Um, and he, you know, came up with this model that has 4 stages. So let me just go through this fairly quickly here. And um, the first stage is called pre-attachment. So there is no attachment at all during this stage. It's from birth to about 6 weeks. And, during this pre-attachment stage, I mean, basically, you could hand your baby to anyone and they could walk out the door with your baby. Like, I mean, the baby's not going to throw a fuss. The baby doesn't know you from a stranger during these first 6 weeks. They, the one thing they do show is certain sensory preferences, at least, for humans. A baby is born, being attracted to human faces and human voices. They like to look at human faces. They like to listen to human voices. So there's no real attachment during this first stage. Just a preference for being with a human. Then we see the attachment in the making stage from 6 weeks until about 6 to 8 months. And one sign that attachment is building is one of the first signs is the social smile, which appears around 2 months of age. And the social smile is a smile in response to another. Babies will smile before 2 months, but usually it's because they have gas or they're just content. Maybe it's just after they ate, their belly's full, they smile. It's not because you're smiling at them. Like if a newborn, seems to smile at you, it's not like they're purposely trying to smile, at you. It may just be coincidental. So this social smile is more purposeful. Once again, it appears around 2 months, and it's in response to another. So you look down at the baby, you smile, maybe they smile back at you, and this is kind of the first sign that they're making a connection or an attachment. And then towards the end of this second stage, you see stranger anxiety. So when stranger anxiety appears, it means that the infant is differentiating between their normal caregiver and somebody that they don't know. And so, they can now tell you apart if you're the caregiver from strangers. So it's not like that they've moved up from the pre-attachment stage to at least recognizing you and being, not being anxious around you the same way they would be around strangers. But the first clear cut sign of attachment in in stage three, which is called clear-cut attachment. Uh, this is separation anxiety. So this stage lasts from 6 to 8 months up to about a year and a half or 2 years. And towards the end of the first year of life, you get separation anxiety showing up. And it is really the hallmark sign that attachment has taken place. When an infant or a toddler shows separation anxiety and they cling to you and they don't want to be dropped off with others, it is um, a definite sign that they are attached to you. And so you should be, the first time your child ever shows separation anxiety, you should be very proud. It's like, they're attached. And I've actually heard, um, not very often, but I have heard before in my life that parents boasting that, oh, my child doesn't show any separation anxiety. They don't do all that clingy behavior, and they're actually like thinking it's a positive, but I don't usually say anything, but it is a negative. If your child's not showing any separation anxiety, then they are probably not securely attached to you. Okay, and then the fourth stage has this weird kind of name, goal corrected partnership or formation of reciprocal relationships from somewhere around a year and a half onwards. And what's important um, in this stage is this last point. The child develops an internal working model, or what may be called a mental model, and this is like a symbolic representation of their attachment relationship, um, meaning that they now have like a, for better, I don't know, for no better word, it's you could think of it as a schema. I mean, the mental model might be better language, but they've developed a schema or a mental model that represents their attachment to their mother or whoever their primary caregiver is, um, and meaning that they now hold it in their mind. So you see a difference once they get to this fourth stage. There's a difference where, like, let's say the mother's going off, she goes off for a few hours every day, because maybe she has a part-time job or something, and initially as a toddler, the toddler would often show separation anxiety every day that she has to leave, and would be often upset while she's gone. But once they develop this working model, this mental model, then it means that they trust that when the mother leaves, she's coming back. It's like they kind of have they have a representation now in their mind that this is a secure attachment, that this is a permanent attachment. And so they don't have to worry as much if they're separated and for short periods and things like that. So that's why he uses the word partnership or reciprocal relationship. It's a mental construction of the relationship, the attachment relationship. And this is really important, because this mental model, this internal working mental model, is going to be kind of the foundation for later relationships in life. So you form this model of what a relationship should be and what a good relationship is, and you kind of carry that with you, throughout life, I would say. And so if it's very positive and you have a very um, good, secure attachment, then it's going to help you when you start forming friendships later in childhood. And it's going to help you when you get to adolescence and adulthood and start forming romantic relationships. I mean, it's you have a mental schema of how a relationship should be, and what it's like for to be cared for by another and to be loved by another. Um, so this is a very, I don't want to stress it too much, but it's a very important point. This internal working model, as kind of your first mental construction of what a relationship should be. And so a child that doesn't have a secure relationship, they're not going to form the same kind of positive mental model. And if they have an insecure relationship, I mean, they're going to have a model where that possibly says, I can't ever really trust others, or I can't really count on others to care for me. And that's going to affect them throughout their friendship formations and their relationships later in life. So an adult that has trouble in relationships, I mean, it may have started because they had an insecure attachment back when they were, 1 or 2 years old, and they formed a model that doesn't allow them to trust and believe in others. Okay, I should go on, but I'll refer to this again at times as this idea of the early mental model that you form, and that's really part of one of the critical aspects of a secure attachment. It gives you the idea of what a loving relationship is. Um, Mary Ainsworth was uh, a student of. She worked with Bowlby. She was a graduate student, I believe, of Bowlby's. Anyways, she took over, and as far as being the major researcher of attachment. She did decades of work in the area of attachment. So her name, like, there's no other name. I mean, Bowlby's is important, but there's no other name besides Mary Ainsworth that is really associated with attachment research. So this is the predominant, is I guess the word I'm looking for, researcher in this area. She developed something called the strange situation in order to measure security of attachment. Um, because it's not something that's easy to measure. I mean, you can't you can't like ask a 2-year-old, about what attachment means to them, or what's in their head, so you need a way to kind of observe different styles of attachment, whether or not a young child has a secure attachment. So this was a sequence that she came up with, and sometimes it's incorrectly called the stranger situation. So it just make note, it's the strange situation, even though there is a stranger in it. Okay, and I'm not going to go through each individual step here, but the basic sequence you can read through this is that there's an important time early on where the mother and child come into a playroom, and there's cameras usually set up when you're measuring attachment or researching attachment. And so there's a playroom, there's some cameras, hidden cameras, um, and uh, and you first of all just want to observe, how does a child play with being in this playroom with the mother. Like, does the child, like, just cling to the mother? Does the child go off and on their own and play? Do they return to the mother? So you get an idea, first of all, of whether or not this child's using the mother as a secure base. Um, because you look at, do they look back to the mother? Do they return to her? Anyways, there's the next, like, really critical point is that at some point, um, the mother's going to leave the room, and they watch for how the child responds when the mother leaves the room. So you're looking to see if there's separation anxiety. And then the third really kind of critical stage, and I'm just kind of ignoring the stranger that's in here, but the third critical stage is when the mother returns to the room. And is what does the child do? How does the child respond when the mother's been gone for a few minutes and then comes back? And based on the child's reactions during these kind of critical testing points, Mary Ainsworth classified them as having either having a secure relationship or one of three insecure type relationships. Let me go through these different categories that she uses. So the one positive is called secure attachment. Um, and this would develop because a mother is sensitive and responsive to a baby's needs. And so what you expect to see for a securely attached child is that when they play in the room, they're willing to leave the mother, but they keep her in sight. They sometimes look back at her. They sometimes return to her. You see that they're using her as a secure base. When she leaves the room, they should be very upset. That's normal response. So they show, normal separation anxiety. They may cry, um, and if the stranger's in the room, like then they can't be they can't be completely comforted by a stranger. But when the mother returns, the normal reaction for a securely attached child is like they would run to the mother and they would be comforted by her picking them up and hugging them, and their crying would stop, and they would be very content that she's returned, and would be would turn to a happier mood in her presence. So excuse me. So those are normal securely attached reactions. So let's look at how these three insecure categories differ from that. In the anxious avoidant category, during playtime, the child kind of goes off and plays and tends not to return to the mother, or it often does not even look back at the mother. It's like the child goes off in their own world. Extremely avoidant, anxious avoidant children may not even notice when the mother leaves the room, and they may not notice when she returns. So they don't show normal separation anxiety. They don't run to her when she returns. And in interactions with the stranger, they seem to interact similarly to the mother and to the stranger. So in the anxious avoidant case, what you're seeing is basically there's no attachment at all between the mother and child. So it's a lack. Anxious avoidant is a lack of attachment. This may come about if the mother has been emotionally unavailable to the child early in life. Just for example, like a mother perhaps has gone through a severe depression, maybe a postpartum depression that's lasted for many months or even years early in life. If she's been emotionally unavailable and not there to comfort the child when they need it, then this is why there may be no attachment. Because remember, attachment is really dependent on comforting, secure caregiving and sensitive caregiving. And a depressed mother probably wouldn't show those characteristics. Okay. The next one is called the anxious ambivalent resistant category. So I'm just going to really kind of talk about when the mother leaves and comes back in what this category will show. I mean, when the mother leaves, the anxious ambivalent resistant child will be upset with the mother leaving. But what you see is just like the secure child is, but what you see is a difference when the mother returns. This child will seek and reject contact with the mother. So like they may go to the mother after she returns and want to be picked up, but when the mother picks them up, they may actually like push on her, like pushing away. In some extreme cases, they might even hit the mother, like you just hit her against her chest or something like. So it's kind of like you see a push pull relation. They want to be close to her, so there's definitely like there is some kind of attachment because they notice when she leaves, they want to be close to her when she returns, but at the same time, what you see is an anger response. They demonstrate some anger towards the mother, and so this is why it's an ambivalent. It's called ambivalent or resistant. I mean, is kind of they seek comfort and then they reject it at the same time. It's kind of wanting it but not trusting it, or and then the reason that the child may behave like this is that um, it's typically when a mother has been attentive to the child, early in life, but the mother hasn't been appropriately attentive to the baby's various cues or needs. So like when the baby's tired, maybe the mother wants to play with the infant, and it's kind of like the mother's been missing signals. When the baby's hungry, like, and crying, the mother instead like changes its diaper or something, and or 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 vice versa. The baby's got a wet diaper and the mother feeds the baby when it cries. Be like, it is so it's been an attentive mother. So like there is like a formation of some form of attachment, but it's an unhealthy attachment. The baby doesn't necessarily trust the mother. The mother hasn't been there appropriately for what the baby needed at the times. But still, this is a mother that's probably has played with the child, has at times like maybe sang to the child, like it's been a mother that's tried to be attentive, but just hasn't done a good job of responding to the baby's needs appropriately. And so it's like the baby has a sense of, I want those good things that she gives me, but I can't trust that she's going to, feed me when I'm hungry or change me when I'm wet, because sometimes she gets it wrong. So this is why you get the push pull. There is an attachment, but it's an unhealthy one at this point. Okay, the final category is disorganized and disoriented. So in this strange situation, the an infant in this category shows a dazed or fearful expression towards the mother, and they may do unpredictable and odd behaviors. And this is why it's called disorganized, disoriented. I mean, like they would, often like show unusual behaviors towards the mother, and they may run to her, they may run away from her. Like, I mean, you get a mix. But what really categorizes this, like I talked a little bit about anger in the last category, that you get some kind of angry responses. In this one, the major thing they look for is whether or not there seems to be any fearful responses. And that kind of really is the hallmark of the disorganized, disoriented category. The reason the infant may be showing unpredictable, and odd behaviors is that they are somehow fearful of this mother. Um, this usually comes about, or at least in some cases, this comes about because of maltreatment, of either abuse or neglect. Um, and an infant in this category, shows no coherent way of dealing with attachment issues, meaning they don't have like one pattern. So um, this is why you get a mix of responses, but this, once again, you typically see some kind of fearful response. And so if you can imagine if a child's been let's just say neglected for long periods, when they're hungry and wet, and no one comes to them, and they've been left on their own for hours. Maybe the mother, you may get this in cases where a parent is like a drug abuser or something, and so there's periods where they're passed out or high or and so um, this baby's, may grow up in a chaotic environment, never knowing when their needs are going to be met, um, and perhaps they've been yelled at a lot because of the crying or spanked as a baby a lot, and so this is why they show a very unusual set of behaviors and a fear response. Um, okay. Um, let's go on. So those are the four categories. One, securely attached, three different types of insecure attachment. And um, behind attachment, and I've mentioned it already before, attachment is based on the responsiveness of a mother to the baby's needs and appropriately responding. So if a mother goes to a baby whenever they're hungry and feeds them, and they change the baby when the baby's wet, and they, if the baby's scared, the mother holds the baby, and so the when the mother is there to provide for all the baby's needs, this is what leads to attachment. Um, is being a sensitive caregiver to what the baby needs at any moment. And okay, um, so just while I'm on this page, I'll just mention that you you may have heard at some point that about strategies of, let the baby cry for a certain length of time before going to them, so that they learn, not to expect you to come right away. And anyways, any expert in developmental psychology, and particularly in attachment, and including Eric Erickson, um, who the one with the psychosocial um, stages of development, and any expert would tell you that the best strategy if you want to develop a secure attachment with an infant is that you go to them anytime they cry. You go to them right away, and don't play games with them. Like, don't, oh, I'm going to wait 1 minute every time, or 2 minutes, or 5 minutes, or whatever. I mean, like, it's not the way to do it. And sure, there may be times where they have to wait a little bit. Maybe you're in the middle of something, you just can't leave like right away when they're crying. Like, you're in the shower, let's say, or something. It's so there'll be some natural pauses, but if you're always trying to go to them when they cry, and promptly take care of them, it is the best way to form a secure attachment. Um, and so don't listen to any advice, parenting advice you might hear, and it actually shows up in certain books that you can use strategies to let them cry it out for a while, or things like that. Any expert will tell you, go to them every time and take care of their needs. They will learn, not only will they develop a secure attachment, they will learn to be trusting individuals, and they will trust the world. Okay. Um, anyways, what helps a mother to be responsive? Well, a good relationship with her partner, that certainly helps. Adequate economic resources helps. Good psychological health, so the mother's not depressed or anxious. A history of good care in their own childhood. Remember, I was talking about Bowlby's idea of the internal working model, the mental model. Well, if you developed a positive mental model when you were an infant because your parents took care of you, and you had a secure relationship, that's still in your mind. You learn from the other side what it's like to be cared for by a parent that loves you, and so if you already have that mental model in your mind, then you can now transfer it, and care for a baby the same way. So people that were brought up with a secure attachment to their own parents are more likely to be sensitive caregivers themselves. And also an infant who is easy to care for. Well, let's face it, when an infant's an easy baby, uh, it's much more pleasant and easier to respond to them rather than a very difficult baby that cries all the time. And like, if you have to go to them like, 10 times an hour because they're crying, I mean, like, obviously that it would be much harder to be always responsive to their cries if it's happening continuously. It's much easier to care for an easy baby. Excuse me. So the role of the father, I haven't really talked about fathers because and most of this research looks at mothers and with the knowledge that in the majority of cases the mother is the first attachment figure. It doesn't have to be. Um, I became very attached to my daughter because I stayed home during her first year. I didn't work at all, and my ex-wife, she was actually going to graduate nursing school, so she was very very busy, and I basically did most of the caretaking and day to day responding to my daughter. So I was I was an early attachment figure with my daughter, and I'm very thankful that I had that opportunity, that I was able to stay at home for a year with her before I came and started working at the MCC. Um, and I think it's we have a fantastic relationship. And I think it all started during that first year of bonding that I did with her. So, anyways, certainly fathers can bond and attach to their and become attachment figures. Um, and but the typical sequence is that once again, a child attaches to their mother first, if she's doing the primary caregiving, and then the father's attachment may take more time and be more gradual and come a little bit later as a secondary attachment figure. Certainly, children can attach to more than one person at a time. Okay. The role of the infant, the infant's temperament can certainly affect the way that the parent responds to the child. Um, I already, mentioned that an easier a baby with an easier temperament is easier to sensitively respond to. Um, but I will mention right now, and I'll come back to it on the next slide, that there is some research that that shows that having a baby with a difficult temperament can actually, in some cases, lead to a more secure attachment. If the parent has adequate resources to deal with a difficult baby, um, then that, in some cases, that leads to a very secure attachment. And I will come back to that on the next slide. Other infant characteristics such as premature birth or neurological problems can affect attachment. Um, it's one of the reasons is that it's more difficult for the parent to read the signals from these babies. So a baby that has certain neurological problems or a premature baby, like it's harder to figure out at times what they need. And part of the sensitive caregiving is responding appropriately to the baby. So like like when I was talking about the the babies in the sorry, I'm just going back to my notes here. The babies in the anxious ambivalent category. Remember, I said that the mother was responsive, but not appropriately to their needs. And so part of developing a secure attachment is that you're doing the right thing that they need. You're changing them when they're wet. You're feeding them when they're hungry. You're putting them to bed when they're sleepy. You're playing with them when they're more wide awake and playful. And so it's harder to read those states in a baby that has neurological problems or in premature babies that are underdeveloped. And so you may end up responding inappropriately to what they need at the time. Okay, so this is results from one study that was done, and this ties into something I was just talking about. But So typically, um, in the early months, the an infant's temperament, and in this case, we're looking at infants that have negative emotionality. Basically what I've been saying, calling a difficult baby. So um, another way to say it is negative emotionality, meaning that they have intense and frequent crying. What they found in this study was that this typically led to less sensitive mothering, by about the 6 month mark. Because the baby's been crying so much that the mother gets it's exhausting to take care of a baby that cries a lot and is very has a very difficult temperament. Um, and then with the less sensitive mothering, it eventually can lead to more insecure attachment by 1 year. Okay, but this pattern that they found, as it says at the bottom, this relationship only held when mothers were at risk either from poverty, inadequate social support, or a history of parental rejection. Mothers who didn't show any of these risk factors were often more involved with their fussy babies. So that, as I was saying on the last slide, that if you have adequate resources and adequate social support, and then and you have a difficult baby, mothers will tend to spend more time with them, and this can actually lead to a more secure attachment. When it is the combination of having a difficult baby, but and also growing up in poverty, or a mother that's working long hours just to put food on the table and try and take care of the baby at the same time, and or inadequate social support, maybe a single mother with um, a single mother without another caregiver in the home. I mean, so uh, the difficult temperament combined with one or more of these risk factors, is what leads to the pattern shown here. Okay. Let me go on here. Okay. Attachment to non-parental caregivers. Despite fears, most children do not require exclusive contact with parents for healthy attachment. So what this is saying is that daycare or childcare is okay. If you are a working mother with an infant or young child, and you need to leave them in a daycare or childcare facility. I mean, um, research has shown that you can still develop a very secure relationship. It's about your parenting while you are with them. So a mother that's even working full time, and as long as she comes home and is very sensitive throughout the evening and the night hours when she does interact with the infant, I mean, we'll develop a secure relationship, a secure attachment. However, okay, um, other factors such as insensitive maternal caregiving may affect this relationship. Once again, we're going to see that there's an interaction of factors that can cause a problem. So for mothers who were insensitive caregivers, the negative effect of their insensitive mothering may be magnified if one of these situations exists. Um, the non-maternal care also is poor. So you are a somewhat insensitive mother, plus your child's going to a crappy daycare or childcare, or it has like non-responsive babysitter or something like that. So if the non-mother care is poor, or the infant spends more than 10 hours a week in care, combined with insensitive mothering, so this mother's not coming home from work and being sensitive during the evening, or the night hours. Okay, or the infant has experienced more than one child care arrangement in the first 15 months of life. You can't just be moving an infant around from caregiver to caregiver and expect them to still develop a secure relationship attachment with their primary, caregiver, their parent. They need stability. So, anyways, so what they find is that daycare or childcare is perfectly fine if you are a sensitive caregiver. If a mother is somewhat insensitive, the results are bad if they're insensitive and you have one or more of these situations listed in these 3 points at the bottom. Um, See, an insensitive mother can be um, can be kind of compensated for if, let's say, that the non-maternal care is like really great. So, like, a mother that's somewhat insensitive because she's working long hours and that. Let's say there's a nanny for the child, and the nanny is like super responsive and sensitive to the child. I mean, like, this child's going to be fine. You're not going to get this great negative effect because this child can learn attachment, secure attachment with another caregiver initially. So you need at least one good caregiver kind of thing. Okay, let's go on. A couple of things about biology, biological underpinnings of attachment. And I don't know a lot about these things. So I'm not going to talk too much about them. But first of all, oxytocin is the hormone linked with loving feelings. It's been called the love hormone. And another hormone I want to mention is vasopressin. It's linked with the ability to recognize individuals as familiar. Okay, and what you find is that neglected orphaned children who are adopted do not have the same production of these hormones as children raised by their birth parents. So if an infant has gone through, some time as an infant being in a neglected, state, being orphaned and not having a primary caregiver, um, this affects them biologically. So that even when they're adopted by loving parents, and this is like what they looked at in this research, so even after they've been adopted by like sensitive, loving, caregiving parents, their hormone system, as far as oxytocin and vasopressin, it may already be messed up because of their early neglect. And so studies of severely neglected children who were later adopted by loving parents, they found that even years later in life, in childhood, years later in childhood, the hormonal responses of these children made them likely to run to any available adult in times of distress. So just to make that clear, like, let's say you've adopted an orphaned, neglected child, and they've spent 1 year in a poor orphanage. You provide them sensitive maternal or paternal care for the next 5 years, or and now they're like in later childhood. I mean, still that early damage that was done makes it that when they're in trouble, they may run to some stranger even though you're available. And so this makes sense with the vasopressin. It's a hormone linked with the ability to recognize individuals as familiar. And so when these children are in need, they don't go to their primary caregivers or their attachment figures like a typical child would. They may go to them, but they may go to somebody else, which is a very interesting result. So it just shows that early damage can affect these hormone systems, and it can still affect them years later, even after they've been adopted by a loving family for a number of years. Very interesting results. Okay. Um, and actually, I'll be showing you a video um, in the last when I do video 6. I'm going to show you a video of a situation like this of a child that was adopted out of a poor orphanage, and we'll see some of the effects. And it's a child that suffers from an attachment disorder, but I just want to bring it up here because it's kind of linked to what I've been talking about here. Okay, let me see what else I got to do here. Okay, Oh yeah, cross-cultural research. So the proportion of infants who are classified as having a secure attachment does not appear to differ cross-culturally. It's always about 2/3 of a sample. Um, in a number of different research samples from different cultures, you get this percentage that's somewhere in the area of about 2/3 of a sample, which would be like between 65 to 70% in that kind of range. That's very typical. But what you get is that the proportions may change in the insecure attachment categories from one culture to another. So it seems like, from one culture to another, the number of securely attached infants are about the same, but you get different insecure categories depending on the particular culture. So different cultures promote different insecure patterns. Um, so there's also differences in the way that parents in different cultures think about what constitutes secure attachment. Let's look at one set of results here. So you can see that there are 4 samples listed here, one from Japan, one from Baltimore, USA. There's a global sample made up of results from a number of cultures. It's kind of like an average result. And there's a Korea sample. And just to ignoring the global sample for now, just comparing the US to the Japan and Korea samples. First of all, you can see that that securely attached figure, like I said, you expect it to be around 65 to 70%. The Korean one's a little bit higher, but in every case, we're looking at about 2/3 in the majority in these first 3 figures at least. It's right around that 2/3 mark, which would be 67%. But look at the difference in the avoidant versus resistant categories. The US has a lot more avoidant infants compared to Japan and Korea. You can see 21% compared to 0 or 1%. But Japan and Korea have a lot more resistant category infants. They're up around, the ones at 21, ones at 32% compared to 12% in the US. So you get different patterns of insecure relationships. Depending on the culture, and there's you could think about reasons for that. Remember um, the avoidant category comes from mothers that have been more distant, emotionally distant. So if a culture has more depression, let's say, and mothers are more likely to be depressed, or you have maybe more single mothers or teenage mothers in a culture like the US, this is what may help to beef up that avoiding category. Um, it's not unusual for um, in particular single teen mothers to have insecurely attached infants, and it's often that they may not be paying, be as emotionally available as they should be as mothers. You know, whereas the resistant category, remember that comes from mothers that not necessarily um, responding to the baby's cues appropriately. And so perhaps in some cultures they have more regimented ways of caretaking for an infant, and so they don't necessarily respond to what the infant needs at the time. Maybe they have certain schedules they try to put the infant on, and so they're not always following the infant's needs at that time, or the cues that the infants are giving. So like, anyways, depending on on the culture, you can get these different patterns of insecurity, um, in predictable ways. Okay. Anyways, I don't want to make too big of a point of that, but okay. So, attachment beyond infancy, long-term outcomes of infant attachment insecurity and disorganization in infancy relate to later externalizing behavior problems such as aggression and oppositional problems. Um, So remember, we in the last, I think it was the last video that I talked about, oppositional defiance disorder and um, and conduct disorder and the certain emotional disorders that develop. Um, and it wouldn't be surprising, it shouldn't be surprising to you that many of the children that end up with those kinds of emotional disorders begin with an insecure attachment. So it makes it more likely, for instance, that a child will develop ODD or DMDD or conduct disorder, like if they start with an insecure attachment. So there are certainly long-term effects of attachment that are related to externalizing problems. I do want to point out that you know there are certainly cases where a child may start out with a secure attachment and then later become insecurely attached, or begin with an insecure attachment and then later become securely attached. This can happen when the circumstances of the child's life situation changes significantly. There's evidence that's been shown in studies that a major change in life circumstances can change a secure to an insecure attachment, or an insecure to a secure attachment. Just to give you examples, I mean, imagine a single parent raising with an infant and toddler, and it's more likely that, or at least the probability is somewhat higher, that this child would be insecurely attached in a single parent family, particularly like if it's a younger parent and they're having trouble managing the demands of parenting. And then imagine that young parent gets married gets another partner in the home, and who happens to be a very sensitive caregiver, like, so that early insecure attachment, with all of a sudden a new caretaker available that's going to help. I mean, that it could change to a secure attachment. So that'd be example, like, of why insecure might become secure. Uh, an example of how a secure attachment might become an insecure one eventually might be the opposite, like where you start out with two loving parents, and perhaps a divorce happened, perhaps one of the parents dies. That would certainly be considered obviously a significant life change for the child, and that could lead to a change in their attachment pattern, and to go from securely attached to being insecurely attached. Okay, let's go on. So I've already kind of talked about the idea of the secure base. Children develop a secure base script. Script is like another word for schema. It's a type of schema, and so it's like you develop a concept. Once again, the idea of a mental model or mental concept, of how your distress is going to be met in life. And if you have a secure attachment, you develop the concept that when you're in distress, somebody will care for you and show concern and support you. So a securely attached child expects support when they need it, while an insecurely attached child does not. And this mental model you develop early on in life, you carry it with you. And it can affect your later, like I mentioned earlier, it can affect your later friendships, your later romantic relationships, certainly all the way into adulthood. What happens, and this takes us back all the way back to the first couple of chapters, what happens in those early formative years can have lifelong effects on a child. And this is one of those areas. So you learn very early in life whether you can expect to be supported and loved by others. and or you're going to grow up feeling like I can only count on myself. Okay. I guess I'll do this quickly. Teens with secure attachment to parents report more more secure relationships with their peers. Just further evidence that if you have a secure attachment, it's affecting you later. So this is in the adolescent years. You have more secure friendships because once again you have that model of what a good relationship is. Adolescents need to have a sense that the parents are committed to them and their well-being. This forms a secure base that allows the adolescent to explore a widening world of social relationships and experiences. This is the secure base idea again, that when you know your parents are there for you, you are more likely to be independent. So, and once again, some people see that as the opposite. They think like, oh, you're really attached to your parents. So like some people might see that as dependence, but it's not. A secure attachment means that you're more likely to go off and explore and then maybe go hiking in Europe or whatever. Like that you have a home to return to, that have parents that love you and will be there for you when you need them. And this is why you can be more independent. Let's go on. How does attachment affect relationships? I'm not going to go through this point by point, but let me just kind of read my notes here. And research that looked at the impact of early attachment on later intimate romantic relationships found that the quality of peer relations, that is like your friendships throughout childhood and adolescence, the quality of your peer relationships together with early attachment was more predictive of some aspects of adult relationships than either attachment or peer relationships on their own. So it's just saying what we found is just looking at that diagram, the one diagram here, it's your early attachment, secure versus insecure, plus the quality of your peer relationships, your friendships with your peers. Together, those are predictive of what your adult romantic relationships will be like. It's a combination of the two. So this shows like both early and later influence on your eventual adult relationships. Early attachments happens very early in life. It forms very early in life. Your peer relationships, happen throughout childhood and throughout adolescence. And together, these two things are predictive of what kind of romantic relationship you'll have. Just to add one more thing before I finish this video, research that's been conducted on the internal working models of adults in their romantic relationships has found that the percentage of adults with different types of attachment styles, and because they have ways to look at adult relationships and rate them as being like either a secure attachment, or they have the same kinds of insecure attachments. They have an avoidant category, and they have a resistant category. Anyways, what they find is that the percentage of adults with different types of attachment styles was similar to the percentage of infants in those same categories. So in a culture or a society, like if there's, just to go back to this chart, I mean, like, we found that in this one study in Baltimore, that about 20% of the sample was avoidant, about, closer to 10% was resistant, and, 2/3 were secure. When we, what this is saying, that when we study adult relationship patterns, we find that about 20% of adults have an avoidant, insecure relationship pattern. About 10% have a resistant, insecure relationship pattern, and about 2/3 are securely attached. What that kind of makes me think, and others have certainly come to the same conclusion, is that we seem to repeat, possibly we're repeating the same patterns that we begin life with when we have our adult relationships, which would make a lot of sense. Once again, I told you, we form early mental models, we carry them with us. So if you learned, if you learned an avoidant, insecure attachment pattern with your mother when you were in the first few years of life, when she was emotionally distant to you, I mean, like, you're going to kind of still have that idea of this is what a relationship is, and so when you are in a relationship, you may be emotionally distant to your partner, or you may accept a partner that's emotionally distant from you, because that's what you learned when you were an infant. And so it's not surprising that, like, we what we see in the results is that we often repeat the pattern that we learned as an infant. We repeat it in our adult relationships, and just more importance of an early secure attachment is that it can affect your adult marriages, your adult relationships. Okay, I know that was a long video and a long section, but that will conclude the section on attachment. The next video, number 6, is going to be very short. I'm just going to look at a couple of attachment disorders in the next video.